So today we're concentrating on section 10.6. We are solving quadratic equations by using the quadratic formula. Now, up till now, we've used several different methods in order to solve quadratics. We've used factoring, we've used completing the square, we've used square roots. Um, a lot of those different formulas, um, you had to have some stipulations. There had to have something else that had to happen for that to work. The quadratic equation is probably the most important because it works for every form of quadratic formulas. Uh, if all else fails, using this will eventually get you the answer that you're looking for to solve for x. Um, as long as it's in the format of a x squared plus bx plus c equals 0, you can solve it. The only thing that it doesn't, you can't get a solution is if b squared minus 4ac is, well, hold on. This is where, right here it says b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0. That's the only time that it works, because if in here, if this is a negative number, we have no solution because we cannot take the square root of a negative number. So make sure you keep that in mind when you're solving the problems. So let's do some examples. So for these examples, they want us to solve the quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. Okay. So first thing I want to do is I want to get everything on one side of the equal sign, so it's set as equal to 0. So here I'm going to have 2x squared plus 7x minus 0, or minus 9 equals 0. So that means that my a here equals 2, my b equals 7, and my c equals a negative 9. So now all I have to do is use those three values and substitute them in to the quadratic equation. Let's do that. So first off, we have a negative b, so we have a negative 7, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 49, minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is a negative 9, all over 2a, which is 2 times 2 is 4. So we got that done. Now it's time to do some multiplication, addition, subtraction. So let's move down just a little bit. Okay, so now I have my negative 7 plus or minus square root of 49 and minus, so I have, excuse me, negative 9 times by 2 is a negative 18, and 18 times 4 happens to be 72. So that gives me a negative 72. But because I have a negative here and a negative here, so it's a plus plus all over 4. And 72 plus 49 gives us a square root of 121, so it would be like negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 121 all over 4. So now I see that if I take the square root of 121, that gives us an 11. So I got negative 7 plus or minus 11 all over 4. So now I can solve x equals, we're given basically two equations. You have to take negative 7 plus 11 divided by 4 to get the first one. So if we do that, We take negative 7 plus 11. That gives us a positive 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1. And if we do it the other way, we have to go negative 7 minus 11. That gives us a negative 18. And negative 18 gives us a negative 2.5. So our answer here would be x equals 1 and negative 2.5. Let's look at B. We have 3x squared minus 1 equals x. So just like in the first one, I want to get it set equal to 0. So I have 3x squared minus x minus 1 equals 0. I put it in this position because I wanted to get it in A, B, and C order. So I know that my A would be 3, my B would be a negative 1, and my C will also be a negative 1. Now, it's just a matter of substituting the values with the correct variables in the quadratic formula. So let's get started. We got negative b, which is, we have a negative 1, so actually it's going to be a positive 1, plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared, which is 1, minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is a negative 1, all over 2a, which is 2 times 3, which gives you 6. Okay, excuse me. So I'm going to go 1 plus or minus square root of 1 minus, so negative 1 times by 3 is a negative 3. Negative 3 times by 4 gives me a negative 12 all over 6. Because it's a negative number, I am going to, yes, plus. So what I'm looking for is 1 plus or minus the square root of 13 divided by 6. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to round that square root of 13 because I think it comes out as a several decimal places. So I'm going to round to the nearest hundredth. So square root of 13 actually comes out to be about 3.61 all over 6. And now again, we're given two equations where 1 plus 3.61 divided by 6, and then also we have 3 minus 3.61 divided by 6. So if we end up solving 1 plus 3.61 divided by 6 gives me a x equals 0.77 about to the round to the nearest hundredth, and 1 minus 3.61 divided by 6, if I were to round it, gives me a value of negative 0.44. Let's look at C. So again, we're going to set one side equal to 0, so I'm going to add 15 to both sides. And here I know my A equals 1, my B equals a negative 7, and my C equals 15. So again, substituting in to the equation, we got negative B. Our B is a negative 7, so that's a positive 7, plus or minus the square root of negative 7, which is 49, minus 4 times 1 times 15, all over 2a. 2 times 1 is 2. So bringing this down, we got 7 plus or minus square root of 49 minus 15 times 1 is 15. 15 times 4 is 60. All over 2. So now I have 7 plus or minus square root of negative 11 all over 2. I see a problem. I see that I have a negative square root. I can't do that. So since I cannot do that, I know without a doubt that this equation has no solution for x. And what we've learned in other chapters, this means that when we graph it, that the quadratic does not cross the x-axis, so we would not have any x-intercepts. So, like I said before, we've used several different methods for solving quadratic equations. We've used it by factoring, we've used it by graphing, finding square roots, completing the square, and today we're using the quadratic formula. Now, some equations that you're going to run across, it's easy to identify which method to use in order to solve for it. Personally, myself, I usually use factoring. I'll usually use find square roots, and I'll always resort to the quadratic formula. Graphing is probably the least likely route people will go to. If you're looking for an approximation, that's fine. But for the most part, we're looking for a little more of an exact value, and that's where you come to get into trouble when you're using graphs, unless you have some type of graphing calculator or graphing software on a computer. That's when it would be more accommodating, I guess. But usually the three that I marked will be more than likely the ones you'll use to solve for quadratic equations. So looking down here is they want you to choose a method to solve the quadratic equation. So since I'm the one solving it, let's look at A. I'm going to look at it right off the bat. I want to make it equal to 0. So I'm going to add 9x to both sides. And I notice that I have a common factor of x. So I think I'm going to factor out an x. And now all I have to do is use the zero product property like we used in chapter 9. So I know that x will equal 0 and x plus 9 will equal 0. So x will equal 0, which I already know. And I also know that x will also equal a negative 9. So those are my two answers. You could use the quadratic equation if you'd like. You'd still get that same answer. Let's look at B. I see B, and I think for this one, I'm going to try to use the square roots to find it. First off, I'm going to divide all sides by 6, which gives me x squared plus 18 equals 0. So I have x squared equals a negative 18. I want to take the square root. Oh, I see I have a negative in the square root. What does that mean? That's right. You can't do that, so we're going to have no solution. I want a little more room to solve this. Oh, that's too much. There you go. Alright, so for C, let's just get everything to one side. So I'm going to move 3x plus 8 to the other side. So I'm going to go 15x squared. So that was a negative, so that's a plus 3x. That's a plus, so that's a minus 8 equals 0. And, factoring doesn't seem to work. It won't use square roots, so, if all else fails, let's just use the quadratic formula. So let's write it up here. So it's negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Excuse me. So if we're going to do that, let's find what our a, b, and c are. So a equals 15, b equals 3, and c equals a negative 8. So we got a negative 3 plus or minus square root of b squared, which is 3 squared, which is 9, minus 4 times a, so that's 15, and c, which is a negative 8, all over 15 times 2, which is 30. So let's bring that down. So I have negative 3 plus or minus square root of 9 minus, we have negative 8 times 15 gives me a negative 20, times that by 4 gives me a negative 480, which then divides out by 30. So negative 3 plus or minus square root of, well, this gives me plus plus 489 all over 30, and the square root of 489 is about 22.11, so I got 3 plus or minus 22.11 divided by 30. So if I were to take 3 plus 22.11 and divide that by 30, I get something that x would equal about 0.84. And if I take negative 3 and minus 22.11 and divide it by 30, I get, let's see here, I get something like 0.64. Yeah. And the last one, D, have x squared minus 10x equals negative 24. Again, let's get it all on one side. So it's plus 24 equals 0. And for this one, I'm going to resort back to something we learned back in chapter 9. And you're going to use the factoring. So I'm going to go parentheses, parentheses. So I got x and x. That plus sign right here tells me that both signs will be the same, and this tells me that it's going to be negative. So what two values? Product gives me 24, but sums up it gives me 10, and I figured that it's 6 and 4. Now I just use the zero product property, where x minus 6 equals 0, and x minus 4 equals 0. Here x equals 6, and x equals 4. You could have used another method. You could have used the quadratic formula. It would have gave you the same answer. So this is how you solve, not just using the quadratic formula, but also being able to figure out what methods you would use to solve any type of quadratic equation. And this is section 10.6. Hope this helped, and until next time.